This is the story of one family's struggle against the Mafia.
We just made a good, honest living, and we weren't even allowed to do that.
It's a story of the power and arrogance of a hidden criminal empire.
They were thought to be invincible. At that time, we never thought about, realistically, getting a mob boss.
The story of how the courage of two honest businessmen enabled police to listen in on the Mafia's darkest secrets.
We should kill them. Right? Anybody comes near us, you know, we'll kill them.
How can you overcome your own voice on a tape? Can you deny what you said?
It's the story of how the power of the Mafia was finally broken, and of the price paid by those who defied it. Long Island, just outside New York City. A world of neatly manicured lawns and pristine family homes. Plush, suburban, it epitomized the American dream of upward mobility. But beneath the surface was an American nightmare.
I always knew there was something going on with the Mafia, even as a child. My mom would drive me to school a lot, to piano lessons and everything, and one day she said to me, "You know why I drive you all the time is because I need to look after you. I want you to, look behind your back a little bit, especially even at the bus stops, because your father's in a business where we're getting threats."
Kathy's father, Jerry, came from a family of Czech immigrants. Back in the 1950s, he'd started a small garbage collection business. Today, the garbage trucks that patrol the streets of Long Island belong to legitimate companies. But in Jerry Quebeca's day, it was very different.
That had been an intractable problem going back 40, 50 years in the carting industry, the garbage collection industry. It had been run by the mob. Everybody knew it was run by the mob.
There was complete and utter price fixing. It was complete and utter control by a major family of the organized crime group.
Jerry Quebeca had done his best to adjust to reality, joining the mob-run Garbage Association.
There was a gentleman's agreement, so to speak, that one was not supposed to step out and solicit other business, beyond your territory.
Jerry's problem was that, unlike most of the other Long Island garbage collectors, he was not Italian. Despite paying his dues to the mob, he found he was being squeezed out. By 1977, Jerry was weary of the struggle. He handed the business over to his son, Robert, and his son-in-law, Kathy's husband, Donald. Robert and Donald were bright and ambitious. Robert had been to business school, and he saw no reason to play by the Mafia's rules.
My brother wanted to be able to go out and make a living like any other person and do it fair and honestly. And he felt if he calculated bids and everything correctly and won it, it should be his. And he didn't like the dirty politics that were going on. It really upset him. It made him mad.
But Robert was playing with fire. The 1970s saw the Mafia at the peak of its power and influence. In New York, 5 Mafia families dominated great swathes of economic activity. From construction to the waterfront to the garment industry as well as raking in vast profits from more traditional criminal activities. Out on Long Island, the garbage industry was run by the Lucchese family, an outfit originally set up in the 1930s and headed by an old-style Mafia don called Tony Corallo.
The head of the family, Tony Dux Corallo, was an interesting person. Gruff.
He was quiet, peaceable, interesting to spend time with.
Corallo was hired merely to walk into a location and stare at people, to keep them in line.
He knew a lot about New York City, knew a lot about a lot of things, unions, union contracts, negotiations.
His major area of concentration before had been labor racketeering.
Corallo was known as Tony Dux because of his skill in ducking subpoenas. On Long Island, the Lucchese family appeared to operate with impunity. When the Quebecers defied the mob-run garbage cartel and began to compete openly for business, the Lucchese family took it as a direct challenge to their power and authority.
They were designated as being rebels. They would show up to the bids and slap my brother's eyeglasses off his face and threaten him, threaten his life, threaten to beat him up. They would sugar the engines of our trucks. I remember one time they actually threw a firebomb into the cab of the truck that my husband was driving right after he stepped out of it.
Finally, at the start of the 1980s, Robert turned to the authorities.
He had a relationship with one of our investigators, and he explained the problems he was having, how they controlled him, and indicated that there were telephone calls made to him by a particular individual.
Ron Goldstock was head of New York State's Organized Crime Task Force. Located in a small building just north of New York, the task force employed little more than 50 people. Like most of the law enforcement agencies charged with tackling the Mafia at this time, the task force had become demoralized.
I walked into the office the first day. There were people with their feet on the desk reading the newspaper. There were no active investigations. There were some indictments that had to be dismissed because of failings. And so it was at once a problem because there was nothing going on. On the other hand, it was an opportunity because you could start literally from scratch and build an organization.
Goldstock galvanized the task force, restructuring it and bringing in outside experts. But the Long Island garbage industry had so far proved a closed, impenetrable world. And so the appearance of Robert Quebeca and his offer to help was a godsend.
He was a rebel. He wanted to do something about it. He wanted his fair share. And he was thoughtful, and he was very helpful.
Quebeca agreed to wear a wire to meetings with other garbage collectors. It was the first step in a chain that would ultimately devastate the New York Mafia. The recordings served to confirm a sworn affidavit from the Quebeca family detailing the harassment they had suffered. And they led investigators to a man named Sal Avellino.
Sal Avellino was the industry specialist for the Lucchese crime family, who controlled the Private Sanitation Industry Association.
On the strength of the affidavit provided by the Quebecers, the task force was able to obtain a court order to tap Avellino's phone. They discovered that not only did he run the Long Island garbage racket, he also had a second, even more important job.
He was also the driver for Tony Dux Corallo. Avellino had a beautiful black Jaguar, which he used to chauffeur Corallo.
Each morning, Avellino would pick up the Lucchese family boss from his home on Long Island and drive him around to his various business assignments. Ron Goldstock was fairly sure they discussed something more than the weather.
So our next step was to think about how to intercept the conversations he was having with Corallo in that car.
Agents obtained an identical Jaguar. For weeks, they practiced to be able to place a bug beneath the dashboard as quickly as possible. The chance to do it for real came in March 1983, when Sal Avellino attended the annual dinner and dance of the Garbage Collectors Association and left his car outside. Torrential rain meant the car park was unattended. 3 agents tailing Avellino seized the opportunity.
Big plastic sheets were put over the car. We were inside the car. The stopwatch went on. The bug was placed in. And then we walked away with the bugged car. And within 2 days, the conversations came out clear and wonderful.
He picked up on one job.
Well, it seems that he don't want. He says that Cody is making a beef and complaining about that because this was theirs.
Let him go complain to Fat Tony.
He says this was theirs.
This is the
Why
carpenter. Let him go complain to Fat Tony. Listen to me, please.
I'm listening to you.
He's got to go complain to Fat Tony. What the fuck has he got to do with carpenters?
Fat Tony was Anthony Salerno, head of the powerful Genovese family. Already, Goldstock's men were hearing the names of the mob's top bosses.
If you listen to the tapes in the Jaguar, which were collected over a period of months, you hear a lot of profanity. But he also, in a funny way, would sometimes get into ruminating about the life of a mobster with the driver that he was talking to.
Here, the 2 men discuss whether to make their sons. In other words, to induct them into the Mafia.
You make your kid? No, not now. I mean, not my thinking right now is no. Might change 5 years from now, 10 years from now, but right now my thinking is no.
Avellino then reflected his attitude was hypocritical.
If the life was good enough for you, and the life was good enough for you, pointed there, meant for me, if we really believe in it, why wouldn't we want our son? If I were a doctor, I would be saying to my son, since he's a little kid, you're going to be a doctor. If I was a lawyer, I would be looking for my son to be a lawyer. So they must feel that if this life was good enough for me, I want it for my son also. Otherwise, we're really saying that this fucking life is no fucking good for the birds, right?
The task force soon realized that in Sal Avellino, the Quebecers had led them to the perfect target for a bug.
Sal Avellino was an educated individual. He was inquisitive. He wanted to know more. And so he would continually ask Corallo information. He saw Corallo as his mentor.
Here, Corallo outlines to Avellino his opposition to the drugs trade, which he felt left his men vulnerable to law enforcement.
I wouldn't be any fucking plainer than I was with some of these guys, because I don't want nobody coming to them. And they're fucking around with anybody fucking around with junkies. They gotta get killed. That's all. Fuck this shit. You cannot be in a narcotic illness and put it on your fucking stomach. And then part of the kind is you gotta be exposed to it. You gotta go out in the street. You got to sell it. You can't be in the drug business without going in the fucking street and sell this cocksucker shit. We should kill them. We should have some examples. All right? All right.
The Organized Crime Task Force was getting an unprecedented insight into the inner workings of a leading mafia family. But they were not the only ones prying into the deepest secrets of the mob. In downtown Manhattan, a revolution was also underway at what should have been the most important of the various agencies charged with tackling the mafia, the FBI.
When I first came in the FBI in February 1970, the FBI was really not equipped to deal with organized crime in a way that could really impact the crime hold that they had on the United States.
At that time, we were a statistic-driven organization. As an agent, you were rated based on how many cases you opened, how many cases you closed, how many indictments you got in a given year, how many arrests you made, and so forth.
The Bureau's legendary director, J. Edgar Hoover, had originally denied even the existence of the mafia and always preferred his agents to focus on other, easier targets. Now, a new generation was forcing its way to the top. It was a generation whose attitudes had been forged in combat.
I was in Vietnam from 1967 to 1968. Spent most of my time up in the demilitarized zone. We sat in that DMZ, basically lived in the ground, taking incoming artillery and rockets from North Vietnam almost on a daily basis. You know, and the feeling of not being able to respond adequately to the war that we were in, not being able to deploy our resources to stop that threat, really having boxes around our capability. It was very, very frustrating. And yes, there were many, many veterans of Vietnam that were populated, you know, into the New York office and populated into other major field offices. And we didn't want to see that all happen again.
Organized crime now became a priority for the New York FBI, and it was restructured to mirror the structures of the Mafia itself, with its division into 5 families.
We reorganized the squads along the lines of families, and I basically said, okay, now this is what we know about this family that you are responsible for. What you need to do is to find out the things we don't know, the hierarchy, who manage things, what crimes they're involved in, what industries they're involved in, what unions they control.
The strategy now was to focus not on the foot soldiers, but the bosses. And like Ron Goldstock's task force out on Long Island, the FBI knew the most powerful weapons at its disposal were the bug and the wiretap.
The bug becomes more important than anything. If it was placed properly where these folks were meeting or planning their criminal activity, you could uncover the scope of the problem. You could find out who the actors were in the whole activity. And it was just the best evidence you can get.
I was honored to take over the technical squad and try to build the resources. We had to have experts in locks and alarms. We had to have experts in communications, telephone systems. You know, we had to have all kinds of expertise. We had to fit in as anybody, as a delivery man, as a milkman, as a florist. We had to play all those roles.
Because I told Rockinell, if Spillibody's price is the same as CNA's price, Rockinell will use Spillibody. I You got the garbage, the garment center, unions, and construction. And of course,
By the end of 1983, the FBI was listening in on the conversations of the heads of most of the New York families.
look at it as a big corporation. You were in a big corporation.
No, the worst thing is that.
Like the organized crime task force out on Long Island, they were getting an unprecedented insight into the culture of the Mafia. Here, an unnamed mafiosi berates an underling for failing to attend a meeting.
My wife just called me, Joe.
Your wife just called you? I'm reaching for 2 days. She said she told you yesterday. I need an example. Don't you be the fucking example. You understand me?
Listen, John.
Listen, I called your fucking house 5 times yesterday. Now, if your wife thinks you a dusky or she's a dusky and you're going to disregard my mother phone calls, I'll blow you and that house up.
I never disregard anything.
And you get your ass down and see me tomorrow.
I'm going to be there all day tomorrow.
Now, never mind you be there all day tomorrow. And don't let me have to do this again, because if I hear anybody else calls and you respond within 5 days, I'll kill you.
Among the most important of the FBI's targets was Fat Tony Salerno, boss of the Genovese family. The FBI had succeeded in placing a bug in the East Harlem social club Salerno used as an HQ. It would prove second only in importance to the Jaguar bug. On it, agents were astonished to hear Fat Tony dictating who would be the next boss of the powerful Teamsters trade union, which represented almost 2 million Americans, including truck drivers and garbage workers.
I would get the transcripts of things, and when I read it, I said, these bastards are taking over, they're deciding who's going to run the Teamsters nationwide. I mean, I couldn't believe it. We knew that they had infiltrated it, but not to the point where they controlled who could become the president.
But to actually hear that discussion, that type of decision that would impact on all trucking in the United States of America would be made by these mopes, these criminals, you know, these blowhards, in my view, was just sort of shocking.
It was a dramatic illustration of the degree to which New York's 5 families had penetrated legitimate economic activity. But both the FBI and the Organized Crime Task Force were beginning to notice something even more intriguing.
You came to realize that these folks were working together. They might have been individual families that, you know, for work purposes and for power purposes, but in the scheme of things, they were working together, sharing these criminal activities.
Out on Long Island, Ron Goldstock's Organized Crime Task Force was starting to notice the same thing. In the garbage industry, while the Lucchese family controlled the Employers Association, it was the Gambino family who controlled the Garbage Workers Union.
Anybody who was a rebel, who wanted to take away a customer by either offering a lower price or better service, actual competition, their workers wouldn't show up the next day.
Between them, the two families had the garbage industry sewn up.
Just Long Island itself probably provided a minimum of $500,000 each to the heads of the Gambino and the Lucchese crime families.
But the bugs were picking up an even more dramatic example of cooperation. For the first time on tape, agents began to hear references to what mafiosis called the Commission.
Now, I told him up there 80 times. I must have said 80 times. I just put he cannot serve a delicious.
The Commission had originally been established in 1931 by the legendary Sicilian gangster Charles Lucky Luciano. It was effectively the Mafia's board of directors.
The commission is essentially the heads of the five families, meeting together to resolve problems.
It was kind of modeled on ancient Rome. They would vote to resolve disputes. They would make decisions about who could be admitted to the Mafia and who would not be admitted. And they would serve as a kind of a court of last resort to avoid disputes over territory. And that actually turned out to be a brilliant conception, because based on that vision and that architecture, the Mafia was able for decades to expand its influence and to avoid the kind of internal bloodletting which had been a problem in the 1920s.
They were the bosses. And, you know, we started to realize we're getting the information about the ruling body here.
Law enforcers now took an extraordinary decision to prosecute not an individual or even a whole family, but the entire New York Mafia by targeting the members of the commission. This would mean putting aside interagency rivalry and taking the historic decision to pool the two separate investigations of the FBI and the Organized Crime Task Force. It would also mean making use of a groundbreaking but largely untested piece of legislation called the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO.
What RICO allowed you to do was to take anybody in a large organization that had the objective of committing at least two crimes and to charge them as part of a single conspiracy, if you will.
RICO made membership of the Mafia a crime in itself.
Prior to RICO, there was a war of attrition, a war which law enforcement was not winning. And very often, in a Darwinian sense, you took out the lame and the weak and you allowed the strong to survive.
Under RICO, the target was the bosses, even if they had not directly carried out a crime themselves.
It gave you the ability to take everybody in the organization, including the leaders, and hold them accountable for the crimes that had been committed under their authority. And that gave us a lot more scope for bringing large-scale cases directed at very senior members of organized crime.
But first, investigators needed a crime that would implicate members of the Mafia Commission. Surveillance tapes had laid bare a system whereby the five families, as a group, took a cut of every concrete deal done in New York. This massively inflated construction costs across the city.
Cement, in those days, the cost of a yard of cement was $42 a yard in New York at the time. To purchase the same amount in New Jersey across the river was $16.
The so-called Concrete Club would form a key part of the prosecution. But to ensure the maximum possible sentences, they needed a second charge, that of murder. They turned to the unsolved 1979 killing of a man called Carmine Galante.
Galante had been the boss of the Bonanno family, which was the fifth family of the major New York families and the one that had gotten involved in drug trafficking.
He was known to deal in narcotics, which was prohibited by the families. And he was considered to be a person who was out of control.
The Mafia Commission disliked the drug trade. This was presented as a moral stance. But, as Tony Ducks Corallo's comments in the Jaguar made clear, their real fear was the exposure it gave them to law enforcement, and the likelihood that the stiff sentences it carried could be used to pressure those caught into turning informant. A decision was taken to resolve the problem in the traditional way.
Galante is in the back of a restaurant called Joe and Mary's Restaurant with a couple of other people and some bodyguards. A car drives up. There are four masked men One stays behind the wheel. The others go into the restaurant. They go through the restaurant right to the back, and they kill Galante and two of the other people who were with him.
Just a few hours after Galante's murder, a hitman from one Mafia family was filmed being congratulated by a boss from another. For the FBI, this made it very likely the hit had been sanctioned by the Commission. Through 1984, investigators continued to gather evidence. On May the 15th, for the first time, they successfully photographed mob leaders attending a commission meeting on Staten Island in New York. Out on Long Island, meanwhile, Tony Corallo and Sal Avellino were continuing their daily seminars on mob etiquette.
Anybody with us, anybody comes near us, we'll kill them.
By now, the bug placed as a result of the cooperation of the Quebeca family was yielding chapter and verse on the mob's control of the garbage industry.
Right now, we as the association, we control the boss, right? Now, when we control the men, we even control the bosses even better now, because now there's even more fucking afraid, right? A strong union makes money for everybody, including the wise guys. The wise guys even make more money with a strong union. Everybody's doing good. Knock on wood, everybody can't go. Let's hope that we can keep it going for the next 15, 20 years.
In fact, time was running out, not just for Tony Corallo and Sal Avellino, but the entire hierarchy of the New York Mafia. On February the 25th, 1985, police swooped.
They're calling it the biggest sweep of underworld leadership in nearly 30 years. 5 reputed godfathers arrested and indicted in New York. They are said to run the 5 most powerful crime families and make up the so-called commission which governs the city's organized crime.
This is a great day for law enforcement, but this is a bad day, probably the worst, for the Mafia. This case charges more Mafia bosses in one indictment than any ever before.
In all, 9 of New York's most powerful mobsters were arrested, including Big Paul Castellano, head of the Gambino family, Fat Tony Salerno, head of the Genovese family, Carmine the Snake Persico, head of the Colombo family, and Tony Dux Corallo, head of the Lucchese family. The New York Mafia was being shaken to its foundations, and top mobsters were soon turning on each other. On December the 16th, 1985, Paul Castellano, head of the Gambino family, arrived at a steakhouse in mid-Manhattan. Out on bail while awaiting the start of the trial, he was accompanied by a single bodyguard. The hit was ordered by a rival within the same family, sensing weakness and moving to take control himself. But for the prosecution in the commission trial, it simply meant one less body in the dock. By the time the remaining 8 defendants were hauled into court 9 months later, They were facing a whole range of charges, from extortion through labor racketeering to murder for hire. The tapes made from the Jaguar bug would now form a key part of the prosecution.
The conversations that were obtained as a result of that bug were enormously important because they chatted not just about payments that were being made, although they talked about that too, but they talked about the structure of organized crime. They talked about where their associates were and what particular jobs they had. What they did is describe in detail an organization, an enterprise.
Tony Corallo was in trouble, and his lawyer knew it.
It's one thing to overcome a witness testifying against you, but how can you overcome your own voice on a tape? Can you deny what you said?
The trial began in September 1986, and the defense immediately made a startling concession.
The bold move that was made, and it was made unanimously by all of the defendants, was the admission of the commission, admitting that the commission actually existed. Because it was almost foolhardy to deny it because the tapes established it.
To admit the existence of the commission was to admit the existence of the Mafia. The defendants had effectively broken the code of omerta, or silence. A defense lawyer now put forward a novel line of argument, that the Mafia was not a criminal organization.
In the opening statement, he admitted that there was such a thing as a mafia, but so what? So what's wrong with that? And that was his defense. And you had to know that there wasn't going to get any better than that.
The defendants denied involvement in the Galante murder and claimed the concrete racket was a voluntary arrangement. But they were confronted with a mountain of evidence to the contrary, including testimony from Mafia turncoats and police spies, surveillance footage, and, above all, hour after hour of secretly recorded conversations. Tony Corallo appeared resigned to his fate.
Corallo just sat stoically, like a man taking his punishment. And I think in many ways that was his attitude. I mean, he obviously, by speaking as openly as he did in the car, it was a major embarrassment. And I think he kind of viewed this as part of his punishment.
He said, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Just do the best job you can. He said, because this is just a question of time.
The trial lasted just 10 weeks. The verdicts were returned on November the 19th, 1986.
Guilty verdicts today in the federal trial of a group of mobsters accused of being the top bosses of organized crime in the United States.
We went through the first set of charges. Everybody was convicted of something. At that point, we knew that we had won. What wasn't clear until we got 15 or 20 minutes into the verdict, because there were a lot of charges, is that we had won everything, that every count was a conviction. At one point, one of the defendants was overheard saying to the lawyer, doesn't this, ever stop?
The government called Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo, Carmine Jr. Persico, and Anthony Fat Tony Salerno the board of directors of the Mafia. And today, after 6 days of deliberation, a New York jury agreed, finding them and 5 of their associates all guilty of running a racketeering and extortion enterprise.
I think it's going to take a long time to replace the kind of network that these men put together.
The judge now made full use of the RICO Act's ruthless sentencing provisions.
Judge Owen sentenced every one of them to 100 years in jail. I mean, he really sent a message to whoever wanted to become the next boss of those families that, this is what you're facing, 100 years in jail.
Punishment for publicity. It has nothing to do with the public good. and I think the penalty was absolutely excessive.
That was the thing that told the world, you don't have to be afraid of these guys anymore.
For over 50 years, the Mafia had prospered in New York and much of America. It had become woven into the fabric of American life. The Mafia had infiltrated legitimate economic activity and even acquired a certain glamour and mystique. But it would never be the same again.
I think it was one of the great turning points in the history of organized crime, because at that point everybody within the mob understood that everybody was vulnerable, including each of the bosses.
The leadership of the organization was demolished, sent to jail, all of its secrets were revealed, and much of the accumulated wisdom and experience of decades of criminal behavior was lost to the mob.
If anything makes organized crime organized, it's organization, the ability to communicate with one another. And when you demonstrate dramatically that communication is dangerous, it radically affects the ability of the mob to operate.
But there had been one curious omission from the charge sheet. The place it all started, the Long Island garbage industry, left out because prosecutors felt it would make the trial too unwieldy. Instead, Sal Avellino and his cronies were tried separately before a rather more lenient judge.
The judge decided to give Avellino community service, and then he allowed somebody else to serve that community service for Avellino. I thought it was an outrageous sentence.
It was a joke. It was such a farce.
But the fact the case had come to court had one disastrous consequence. Robert Quebeca's role as an informant was now public knowledge.
Robert became infuriated because his name was never supposed to be disclosed. And he felt like, you know, I put myself out on a limb for you guys, and my name's being disclosed now, and then you're slapping Avellino's hand.
The Mafia remained in control of the Long Island garbage racket, and their intimidation of the Quebecers continued.
From 1986 until 1989, the threats continued, the damage to the business continued, the damage to the equipment continued, the threats to the customers continued. Nothing had changed.
Furious, far from backing off, Robert and Donald stepped up their collaboration with the authorities, cooperating with a number of investigations. It was a dangerous strategy. On August the 9th, 1989, Robert Quebeca received a series of phone calls.
There were 3. 2 were just kind of veiled threats, and the final was a threat to his life.
They informed the police. But when Donald went home to his wife that night, he appeared unconcerned.
Donald said, "No, Kathy, don't worry about it. We've made our phone calls and contacts to everybody as usual that we've done throughout the years, and they've told us there's no concerns, that we're okay, and I'm going to work in the morning." Much to my dismay, he went.
The 2 men were in the office as usual at dawn the next morning. Robert was shot 3 times and left for dead. Somehow he managed to call for an ambulance. But he died later that day. Donald had been killed immediately. Kathy was told only that there had been an incident involving her husband and her brother. She rushed to the office.
It was a police officer who approached me and actually took me into his car and let me know what happened and asked my opinion of who I thought it was. I said there was only one name I always heard about through the years that was a great threat to the family, and that was Avellino. I said it had to be him.
With Robert and Donald out of the way, the Mafia showed no mercy, muscling in on what was left of the family firm.
Once they died, the women in the family, we had to deal with trying to save the business, and then we had to watch the Mafia come in like vultures and just eat us alive business-wise. I mean, we practically had nothing to sell after a couple of months.
The Quebecers successfully sued the Organized Crime Task Force for failing to protect Robert and Donald. But the authorities did now finally begin an all-out assault on the power of the Mafia in Long Island. In 1993, Anthony Gaspipe Casso, Tony Corallo's successor as boss of the Lucchese family, was arrested. To reduce his sentence, Casso agreed to cooperate with the police and admitted the family's role in the Quebecers' killings. The guy was an informer, Casso said. There's only one way you deal with informers. You kill them. In 1994, Sal Avellino was sentenced to 10 years for helping plan the Quebeca murders. Today, Long Island's garbage companies are free of mob influence. More broadly, the Mafia is now a shadow of its former self. The commission trial that the Quebecers helped kickstart proved the first in a series of RICO-based investigations that would devastate the organization.
These guys are they're like a street gang now. I mean, they've been reduced to that.
Sucking shit, we should kill them. All right? Anybody comes near us, we'll kill them.
More importantly, the insights gained during the commission and other inquiries helped destroy the glamour and mystique of the mob.
These were not geniuses. These were not people who were strategists. These were people who could hardly understand each other. They were incredibly unsophisticated and incredibly parochial.
Listen to me, please. I'm listening to you. He's got to go complain to Fat Tony. What the fuck has he got to do with carpenters?
It was, as you listen to their intercepted conversation, unbelievable that people with so little understanding could control so much and make so much money.
But the story of the Quebeca family is a reminder of the power the mob once wielded, and of the cynicism, greed, and sordid brutality that was the reality of the Mafia.
What the Mafia has done to me is just tear apart my life. They're run by power, greed, and violence. They're bloodthirsty, power-hungry people. They're monsters. I lost both my husband and my brother to men. I mean, my brother was everything to me. We just made a good, honest living, and we weren't even allowed to do that.